In this video we go on a North Korean human safari and get dangerously close to North Korean soldiers while further exploring the Chinese border city of Dandong. In the previous video I showed how I traveled from South Korea to Dandong and ended up having a Korean conversation with North Korean staff at a secret North Korean brewery. Good morning guys, from the city Dandong in China. Am I right? The Yalu River and on the other side North Korea. It's crazy to be so close to North Korea. If you zoom in with your phone, you can see people walking on the other side. And why it's crazy? Because as someone who lives in South Korea, you're familiar with the DMZ, the most demilitarized, I should say, militarized border region in the world. But here in China, it's completely different. 한복? 치마 쪼그리? No. Not me. No, thank you. Time to check out the Broken Bridge. Yeah, this is going to be interesting. I always thought that the Chinese wouldn't be so interested in the border area. I mean, as tourists, right? Because in Korea we go to Imjinggak, the DMZ, many observatories, as these days even a Starbucks where you can drink coffee while looking into the oppressed on the other side. But apparently the Chinese just seem to enjoy it too. I guess we're all a bit curious no matter which side you're on. I've always been intrigued by border regions where two worlds meet and create a different culture or spatial design than elsewhere in the country. I usually travel and document my journey within Korea, but living close to the DMZ, I couldn't help but think about what the border looks like on the other side. So here I am. I read about this guy. I believe this is the man who led the Chinese army over the Yalu River to stop the UN forces from advancing. The bridge connecting to the other side is the Sino-Korean Friendship Bridge, built by the Japanese Imperial Army between 1937 and 1943, during the occupation of Korea and Northeast China. This is the bridge from where you can cross into North Korea, with the proper permission, of course. If you're wondering about any trade between China and North Korea, this is what I filmed last night. So once in a while you see a truck crossing into North Korea coming back. The American pilots, they were clearly instructed not to bomb on the other side because that would have been a direct attack on China. So this is what the North Koreans look at. And I imagine at night this is all lit up, all of this. And on this side, it's pretty dark. The bridge I'm standing on is the Yalu Broken Bridge, also built by the Japanese between 1909 and 1911, and heavily bombed by the Americans during the Korean War. Well, all bridges were heavily bombed, but this one was intentionally left broken as a monument, and is now a popular Chinese tourist attraction. Photo time. Okay. Bye-bye. Several North Korean boats passed underneath the bridges. I think I've never been this close to one. Yeah, it is definitely a North Korean boat. You have the propaganda ladders here, North Korean flag. So crazy, everything is crazy. To see a North Korean boat going underneath the bridge, close to China than North Korea. To me, what's weird about this is that yesterday I met North Koreans in a bar coming here to this side to work, but nobody can really go to North Korea, so what you can do is come here to the promenade and just look into the other side. We have all these curiosities, while some North Koreans have the privilege to work in China, and they see then all these tourists go to the Broken Bridge, have a peek inside North Korea. It's so surreal. Yeah, hello. How much for this one? 30. 30? 30. North Korea number one. North Korea number one? Yes. Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un smoked this cigarette? Yes. 20? Yes. Okay. Oh, this one, sorry, this one. No 20? No. Are you sure? 25, okay. 25? Yes. I don't smoke. 20? No, 25. 25? Okay, sure. According to the vendor, the favorite cigarettes for Kim Jong-un. So there are merchants like that sprinkled around the area, and they also sell a lot of counterfeit products. But there's another place in the city which is off the beaten track, which if you don't know about it, you will never find. It's an antique market where supposedly a lot of real North Korean products can be found and can be bought. So that's what we check out later. But here's a little taste of that.
You can buy North Korean products under the bridges, but chances are you will either get a fake or pay 3 times the real price. Badges, stamps, money, cigarettes, all tempting for collectors, if they're real. But that other place I mentioned, it blows this one out of the water. Not me though, I'm going into the water for one of those North Korean riverside boat tours.
Ready for a boat ride, guys? I think small brain American, he called it a real human safari, which it basically is. We'll see how close we get to North Korea and how much we can see. Yeah.
The Yalu River, also known as the Amnok River, along with the Tumen River, forms the natural border between China and North Korea.
It's more of a neutral zone, so Chinese ships are allowed to go very close to North Korean coastline, and also North Korean ships are allowed to go very close to the Chinese coastline. Riverside. That's why earlier we saw North Korean ships so close to Chinese riverside. And here is a North Korean ship. You can see the North Korean flag, and the captain is inside.
You can easily peek into North Korea, looking for clues about the economy and the hardships of daily life. It's definitely not representative of the whole country, and much is left up to interpretation. There's visibly more military presence on the North Korean side than on the Chinese side. Watchtowers, soldiers patrolling the riverside, some looking back at us through binoculars. I didn't see many ordinary North Koreans on this North Korean river island. The housing estates look fairly new, some still under construction, much better than all the photos I've seen, perhaps built to impress tourists. Being this close to North Korean soldiers almost felt illegal. I could have talked to them if I wanted, but that wasn't allowed. The North Korean military does also constructions, and they are very best to keep ordinary North Koreans who want to escape from crossing the river.
I'm honestly, guys, not so sure how I feel about this experience. We're so close to their riverside. I can see, you can almost touch the North Korean soldiers. At the oppressed authoritarian Hermit kingdom on the other side, and only a few privileged people, probably from Pyongyang, are allowed to go to China, do work, earn money, go back, and the others are stuck in their country, not allowed to know many truths, and not allowed to leave. I guess it's not so different than going to one of the observatories of South Korea, look through the binoculars to see the other side. But so far China has been good, especially when you're well prepared. So you got to make sure you have all the applications, the WeChat, the Alipay, offline maps, something to get a taxi with. I still got to check it out. I haven't tried it. It's called Bibi. Yeah.
One place that had been on my list for some time was the Chinese Memorial of the War to Resist US Aggression and Aid Korea. Outside, just like at the War Memorial in Seoul, a lot of military hardware is displayed. To get inside, you have to walk up, but I missed a ticket box at the bottom because of the language barrier, I guess. Luckily, the guard helped me buy a ticket online and let me in.
Okay, 谢谢. So here they say that the Korean Civil War broke out, and the Truman administration of the US immediately carried out an armed intervention and spread the war to the Yalu River, seriously threatening China's national security. What I find interesting is that whenever they explain both countries, they refrain from defining the political system. As when you go in the south to War Memorial, they will probably say like Communist North or Capitalist South, but here they don't use those words, not yet, not that I've seen. So they say political systems, but they say different political systems. So that's quite interesting. You can clearly see the importance of wording, phrasing, and the way you describe things, because they don't really say who started the war. And also they don't mention the UN. From what I read here, that only sounds like it was the US they were fighting against. You can just so imagine that a museum like this and the way you teach history impacts the way everyone in your nation thinks about a certain piece of history that other countries among each other can't agree upon. And then the people in those countries, they are indoctrinated and influenced by what they were taught by the nation about that history. So, you know, imagine a Chinese and a South Korean or an American meet in another country and they talk about the Korean War. There's no way they can agree on anything that they think they know about what happened. I'd like to think that what I've learned in South Korea is obviously the truth.
The Korean War is explained differently depending on which side you're on. In this museum, I could find no criticism of North Korean actions or its responsibility for starting the war. And the US is portrayed as the aggressor. They are saying basically that they stopped US aggression, while our story is how South Korea was invaded and how allies helped save us from communism. This museum is a powerful tool of state propaganda and shows exactly what China is and their stance in the Korean War.
I remember one of my friends, a Dutch veteran, he told me that he was on the hill and then he heard a horn and the Chinese soldiers, they stormed the mountain, and that's what you see here on the photo. War just sucks, man. War just sucks.
In the next video, as promised, I will show you an off-the-beaten-track antique market where many North Korean goods, and most of them real, can be bought. But we also get out of the city to Tiger Mountain, where North Korea is literally one step away. See you then. Houdoe.